All right, welcome everyone. My name is Lorley. I am so honored and so happy to be here with all of you and to be joined by Mr. Andre Cohen. And we're going to have a little bit of conversation back and forth around insights to leading diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Andre?
Hey, so one of the things that Laura and I wanted to do was make sure that we had space to kind of talk about what is important around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation today. Hope that you find some of the resources that we're sharing helpful and valuable. I mean, over the combined you know 40 years of work in this space. We've learned a few things. We're learning new things every day as this pendulum, the long arc of history bending towards justice. We're part of that bend. So
So you brought
sometimes
up,
we're yanked.
yeah,
Yeah.
you brought up that we've been in this space for 40 years combined, right? So
Yep.
give
Yep.
the
Yep.
people a little bit of history on you and kind of what you've been doing in that time period.
Yeah. So I would say it all started when I was born. Um, a poor black child in Mississippi,
You
right?
weren't
No,
born in Mississippi, come on.
no, but I would say, to be honest, Laura, I mean, it's much like you, but my our journeys are
Yeah,
different. I was born to do this, right?
yeah.
So my dad was a Black Panther in the late '60s, early '70s. My mom was a adaptive phys ed teacher, and so recognizing the social responsibility and compassion through action, right?
Hmm.
That was really the bastion of what led me into this space. And so going to a historically black college and university setting, growing up there, being a part of that, and then going on to get a master's at St. Thomas after going to uh, uh, going, doing my undergrad work and whatnot. I think it was really impactful when I started doing this work in the Twin Cities. And so when I taught high school at a charter school that was really focused on giving kids and young people the tools they needed to be successful, right? So the school was Skills for Tomorrow, which was applicable then and today. And so teaching as an adjunct professor at a number of local universities and colleges here in Minnesota, to being the affirmative action officer for one of, I think it's the third or fourth largest county in Minnesota. Going on to work at Mayo Clinic and with some other medical institutions, and delving into health equity, and recognizing that this is a constant spiral that just keeps getting bigger and broader. I think that's a rundown of my resume, but I think more importantly, it talks about how we've been adaptive,
Yeah.
right? And so, even trying to help people understand, like, the secret war that the Hmong were a part of is, people say, well, that's history, but that's also the context,
Yeah.
right? So if you don't understand why Hmong people are here in Minnesota, then you miss out on recognizing who and uh, why they are,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, you want to talk a little bit about your story, your journey?
Yeah, so you brought up among involvement in the Vietnam War or Vietnam conflict, however you want to determine that and define that. But I was actually born in the refugee camps of Bon Vinai in '79 and came over with my parents when I was 7 months old. So I am an immigrant to this country, but grew up here, naturalized citizen, and grew up in Minneapolis and went to very diverse schools. I think back to my experience in Minneapolis, St. Paul, or Minneapolis public school districts, right? And very diverse school all the way up to my high school career, where then my parents decided we're gonna buy a farm. We're gonna buy a 20-acre farm and move all of y'all out to a small town called Corcoran, Minnesota. And I graduated. I went from 525 ish in my would have been graduating class at Minneapolis South to about 88 in my yeah graduating class at Rockford High School, right? And I was one of a small handful of kids of color that graduated from that with that particular class. Rockford has since grown a little bit, and then I went into my undergrad, got my undergrad in political science, and fast forward, my first role in DEI was within the HR and even under org development, right? And so my journey into, or sorry, in K-12, and then my journey into the DEI healthcare space was in that vein. And so the last 20 years has been spent on academics, has been spent on helping healthcare step into this space, has been spent on other industries, supporting as a consultant coming in to support and help them develop everything from training to strategies to roadmaps to you name it, to help their particular journeys around advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And in that 20-year time period, right, I think back and early on, for those who may be following me on LinkedIn, you've probably seen in this video before or heard me talk about this, is that early on, I look back and I was driven by passion, right? I was driven by passion in this space. And to your point, Andre, about the lived experiences that have brought us here and my lived experiences that have shaped who I am, just like yours being born to a black pastor, right? Those life experiences shape us. But as I look back, those were not the only things that helped me be effective in this space, right? And
Yeah.
so as I think about this, right, and it's like in the last 2 to 3 years, there's been lots of people stepping into the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging space. And a lot of people coming in with passion and lived experiences and some very people who are doing some great work because they have some business know-how, right? But as I think about that, people who are in sole incumbent roles will often struggle if they don't move past that passion and that lived experiences alone.
Yeah, and you tapped on something that I want to come back to, right?
Sure.
Is the notion of the passion, and so passion is what got my dad fired up to become a Black Panther,
Mm.
right? But passion would never give my dad a seat at the table,
Tell me more. What's the difference
right?
between the two? Like stepping into and at the seat.
Yeah, so at least for me, and when I think about it, and I'm not trying to belittle or say that there was something wrong with what my father's approach was,
Hmm.
because his approach allowed doors to be open, because folks were like, you know what, I don't know that I want you yelling and screaming at me, so come sit down at the table and let's have a conversation, right?
Okay.
Or let's talk about these policies that help us with these policies and whatnot. And so I would say that passion is great, and you need that passion to fuel. But just like a candle that is not managed well,
Hmm.
or a fire that's not managed well, your passion you will be ignited, but you will burn yourself out,
Mm.
right?
Good analogy.
Right. And so it really is about how do we build skills and coalitions and leverage our influence or other people's influence, which is something that when I came into this work, I didn't recognize. I didn't think, because I was like, you should do this because it's right.
It's the
Do
right
it
thing to
because
do.
it's the right thing to do. So why aren't people doing the right thing?
Yeah.
Well, everybody ain't right. Right. So no, so thank you for bringing up that passion, because that's a lot. Even now, a lot of leaders will say, well, you just need passion. And I would say that again, it's a great place to start, but you need a little bit more than that.
So reflecting on that, right? What were those things? So let's talk about the challenges. reflecting back on that 20 years of experience, what were some of your challenges as you were stepping into this work early on, that now you reflect on and like say, hey, if I would have done that differently this way, that would have been
Yeah.
different outcome.
Yeah, so I want to do that, and but Laura, if you can, while I'm doing that, if you can go into LinkedIn, because I'm getting a couple of chats that people said that they don't know where to come into this call on link chat
Gotcha.
on LinkedIn. So if you can go into LinkedIn, and right now, I really want to make sure my sister at Proliance gets in. So if you can make sure that she gets that invitation. But no, I think when we think about some of the things that we wish we would have known moving into this space or transitioning. Um, Again, I think I'm a purist,
Mm.
right? So I really came into this space with understanding things in black and white and binary, and we should do this because it's right, and it's and so building the notion of building a business case was like that's just a formality because everybody thinks that this is right. And as I've grown and as I've developed in the space, what I've recognized is that we need a both and,
Hmm.
right? So it's not an either or. And I operated a lot of times in either or spaces. Like you're either racist or you're with me.
How did that
You
work
either
out for you? No, I'm just kidding.
right. You either hate what I'm saying or you love what I'm saying. And the and part of that is maturity
Yeah.
and growth and development, but it's also about having mentorship opportunities and partnering with folks, so you don't have to have those bumps and bruises going into this space. So um, I think that's one thing that stands out for me as I'm thinking about doing this work. For
I'm gonna
you,
add to that. Like, so you talked about passion, right? And assuming that everyone wants to do this because it's the right thing. One of the things I was assuming early on in my career was not just it's the right thing and people want to do this, but people know about it and people know what to do,
right?
right? And I think that's the and people know what to do to actually implement it. So, like, I'll give you an example. Early on in my career, I was working with a communications leader, and my assumption was that this communications leader, they showed that they were passionate, they were on board, wanted to help do the work, and
Mm-hmm.
so I left it at that, and not actually hand holding this communications leader through the actual implementation. What does that look like? What does that sound like from their team? What's the written comms that needs to come from their team, right? What's the perspective? How do they flip their visuals that they have? All those block and tackling that comes along with making ensuring that there is diversity, at least diversity in
Yep.
the comms and marketing materials, right? And left it up to them, assuming that they know what to do,
Yep.
right? And that's just one example of a particular function within an organization. But as I think back, there were many of those experiences, whether it's in HR or the patient care side or any other functions within that organization. And just assuming that, oh, they have a master's, they have a doctorate, they're a physician, they're a whatever, SHRM certified, uh, that they should know what they're
Whatever.
doing, right?
Yep.
And that
Yep.
was to me, later on in my career, was the biggest aha moment, or one of them, is that these folks are great at what they do, but not at what I do, right? Not in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And if I want them to be better, I need to teach them and show them what it means to be better, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like, how it's written, the pictures that are on the. So I think that's for me one of the biggest ahas early on in my career was I left it for that particular function, that profession to do what they believe is right, right? And then how it came back to bite me was, but Laura, you're the expert, right? You're the expert. You should be telling us what to do.
Yep. Yep.
And
You know, and it's really funny too because I was sitting with some leaders and we were talking about some things, and I went back to my K-12 experience,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
And I remember as a part of my K-12 experience being really frustrated with my eighth graders
yeah,
because there was a body of information that I had assumed that somebody else had taught them. And
mm,
so I'm operating as if, and I'm getting
yeah,
frustrated, right? Because I'm like, first of all, you're not getting the concepts. But then I'm getting frustrated because somebody else didn't teach them the concepts.
yeah,
And that frustration kept building and multiplying until I realized I can't hold them accountable for things that I have not taught them.
mm-hmm,
And so if there were holes in their educational experience, then I had to fill those holes. If there were things or expectations or places I wanted them to go in that curriculum, in that curriculum, I had to make sure that I did that. And the same happens, particularly in the DEI space, right?
mm,
In one of my posts on either LinkedIn or Facebook, I think I put this conversation around there can be no confidence without competence,
mm-hmm,
right? So
mm-hmm,
if people don't, oftentimes people don't act, they don't do, they don't excel, oftentimes, or even move because they don't have the confidence to do it. And you get that confidence to be through competence. And so we have to teach people, we have to walk with them, we have to practice and do scenarios and all of these things, which early in my career I didn't get. I was like, hey, these people are smarter than me. So, or they've been in this field longer than me,
yeah.
and so they should get it. When in fact that was not necessarily
There's some
true.
truth of that to the DEIB practitioner too, though, right? Like, I can reflect on my early beginnings and wish I had known some basic competencies to gain that confidence that you talked about, right?
Yeah.
Because the reason I say that is as I've talked to DEIB practitioners, there's people who are coming into this work from multiple backgrounds, professional backgrounds, right? There's people who are coming into this work through their previous work as a lawyer. There's people who have come into this work as an OD practitioner, as
Mm-hmm.
a consultant, HR professional. Some even in especially the health equity space, your physicians, your nurses, right, who are coming into this work. So we all don't collectively have the same basic knowledge and foundation. And 20 years ago, there wasn't the certificate programs. There wasn't the uh, uh, university programs that we have now all over the nation that people are tapping into that gives them that theory, that gives them those basic knowledge. What are some of those things as you think about in your early years? What are some of those things you know now that you wish you would have known then?
I think part of it is so there is some academia in this space now that wasn't
Yeah,
available to us then,
correct.
right? So when I was starting doing this work, it was just diversity.
Yeah,
That was it. And before, and to be honest, before that, it was sensitivity training. Like
I remember
when I
those.
right when I started this work, that's what we're going to do some sensitivity training, and we want you to be more sensitive, right? So I think there's a body of scholarship that is constantly growing.
Yeah,
I think the language is growing, and so some people will say, particularly those of us who started in that sensitivity or even sexual harassment, right,
yeah,
was like the real big piece that got us to sensitivity training.
yep.
Um, people will say that, like, the language is changing and I don't know what to call stuff and all this stuff. So one of the things that I wish I would have, and I think I did because it was a necessity, is uh keep up with current scholarship
Mm,
around these relationships, right? And I think in the beginning we didn't have that, and so we were trying to decipher this elephant, with us all being coming from different points. And so and I think the other thing that I wish I could have spent more time thinking about as a younger person is the unintended consequences of some of either the behaviors, the trainings, the engagements that I had with folks, because there are some unintended consequences.
yeah.
I can remember in the 90s specifically, I was really on this demographic shift thing. I'm
Yep.
like, in 2040, it's going to be majority people of color and da 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 da. But what I didn't take into account is that some folks might not be excited about that shift.
Hmm.
Right? I never took, and so recognizing the unintended consequences, and I think we're living with some of those
Yeah.
unintended consequences of being happy about, some of us being happy about this demographic shift, where other folks are like, "You're trying to replace me,
Yeah.
you're trying to da da da," and when in fact we're not. What we're trying to do is be effective
Yeah.
for the future context,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's one thing I would say, that this notion of being a scholar of the work, as well as recognizing that there are unintended consequences of some of the approaches that we've used. And so, yeah, for you, what were some
Yeah.
of the things
So
for you?
for me, I think part of it is early on did not realize that this work is really about systems change, right?
Mm,
And with that comes the understanding of how systems work and how organizations work and how the culture of an organization might impact what you can and can't do or how you might do things, right? Because you can't just take, for example, I'm just making this employee resource groups. That's a hot
yep,
thing. It's been a hot thing for a while. You can't just take the way one institution runs employee resource groups and just plug it into your own organization because that's not your culture. That's not
yep,
the system in which you're operating under. That's like theirs, right? And so some organizations, where I've seen is they have ERGs that have your senior level leader who are your senior executives who are supporting the ERGs who are led by your frontline or maybe your manager early careerists. In some institutions, you have ERGs who are run by some of your highest level, high potential leaders who are looking to make a next move in their careers, right? And those are two very different approaches. And if my institution was not ready for the latter, I can't institute that. So I've got to be able to understand how my systems work and how that what I may do with ERGs may impact, for example, in healthcare, especially in those hospitals and health systems that have, like in Minnesota, the MNA, right, Minnesota Nursing
yep.
Association, unions. How does that impact the union staff? Right? And so, how do I get union staff on board with this? Because it's not just let's just go out and do this thing. It's about getting buy-in from multiple stakeholders and understanding how what you may do in your quote unquote isolated part of the organization actually impacts the rest of the organization, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's for me one of the early learnings that, and that's why I eventually went back and got my master's in org development. It was like, oh, this is about systems change. This is about org change. This is about behavioral change. This is about helping people gain those competencies and skills, like you said earlier.
And this is where passion won't take you,
Yeah.
right? So it is interesting that when we think about that the systems change approach. And I'm just going to draw back on my father, right?
Yep.
He had a systems change approach, but it was very personal and driven by well, no, let me back up, because the Panther Party was phenomenal. They did
Yeah. Yeah.
amazing
Yeah.
things, right? Um, However, when individuals have a passion that's not connected to a body of work,
Yeah.
right? So if my dad wasn't a lone Black Panther, he would not have been as effective as the Panther Party was
Yeah.
as a collective, right?
Correct.
And so a lot of times in these roles, we have the one person who
Yeah.
has the passion, but do they recognize change management, that actual in these times, in this context, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are really about change management,
Yeah.
more so than just doing the moral right or just thing, which is how we came into it, right?
Yeah.
And so, no, I think that change management is really important. And I think a lot of times organizations will bring in someone with passion or someone who is a community leader
Yep.
in this space, but not either give them the tools or the education, or the leader might have it innately, but hasn't been able to bring flesh and bone to it so that other people can see it, understand it, and join them in these passionate efforts, so
So that's a great segue, because I wanted to shift our conversation to talk a little bit about successes, right?
mhm.
How have you used, and what type of change management tools have you used to really help organization, whether it's organizations, teams, individual leaders within organizations? What, how, share with me some of those successes as you were, that individual practitioner within an organization. What did you draw on to lead you to those successes?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think you have to understand where your organization, right? So,
Yeah.
so what are some tools that they currently use for that? Because if you start trying to introduce stuff
Yeah.
that has worked for you either in the past or things that again, and you're not tuned into what that culture is, you're setting yourself up for
Yeah.
failure. So I would always encourage people to go to the organization and figure out, like, what are some of the, how do we talk about change management? And you may want to even go to unlikely suspects to help you figure that stuff out, right? Project managers in an organization, or budget and finance, right? These are some folks that you can go to and say, well, how do we talk about change management, or how do you talk about it?
Yeah.
And what can
Yeah.
I learn from that to pull into my DEI work? And both to get the tool, but secondly, you're creating a network of
Yeah.
allies who say, you know what, that diversity person tapped into my expertise, and I'm not even in diversity. So,
Piques their interest too, right? Like, oh, what
right.
what is that about? How do
Yeah.
we talk about change management, DEIB together? Because I thought those were two different things.
Yeah, and what does that have to do with
Yeah.
financial management, or whatever? So there's that. But you asked about what tool that I love,
Hmm.
AdCar, right? And so I think that was created by ProSci
Yeah.
back in the '90s. So I'm an old head, I'm
Old
original
school.
OG. Woo, woo, woo. Um, but I like it just because it gives some clear benchmarks on how you can look at an organization, um, and create opportunities for that. So that's a tool. But one of the things that I have found to be really helpful is using that model as a principle. So I don't
Yeah.
sit down with a group or people or a team and say, we're going to go through step 1 of AdCar.
Yeah.
Now we're at step 2, right? But I use it as a principle and really try to look at my own programming, because I'm a programmer, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not I'm a teacher, I'm a coach, I'm a I can do those other things, but when I think about the system change things, I think it from a programmatic approach. And so when you think about successes, right? So what a change management methodology or principle centered approach gives you is some leverage to think about things differently, right? So I had an employee who wasn't my employee. He was the organization's employee who was on the verge of being put on a performance
Mm.
appraisal plan, right? So those are never good.
Yep.
We say we want to help people be better or whatever, but usually it's just a paper trail to escort someone
Eventually
out the
leave.
organization.
Yeah.
Right, right. So, so I asked the manager, is this someone that you really want to invest in, or should we just let he was the manager was like, no, this is somebody who really could, with some work, be a huge asset. And so
Mm.
the the situation was, I can't get into details, but it was around not understanding other cultural groups and why they do what they do,
Sure.
right? And
Sure.
I told the manager, I said, can I have them for 30 days? Can I have them for 30 days? And he said no. So I got them for 3 weeks, and so in those 3 weeks I work with them and I coach them and I share information with them. And then I asked them to be the trainer. Well, I asked the supervisor to ask them, could they be the lead trainer for DEIB in your work group? And
Sure.
they looked at me a little strange, and they were like, this person? I was like, yeah. And so what I did was I gave the person enough information. We had enough coaching, and by the end, they were they were ready to be the
Mm.
DEI influencer in that team, right? And so this was a person that was going to be escorted out, but they became a strong ally once they had tools,
Yeah.
they had education, they had things. But I had to use a systematic model to get there, which is what the ADCAR model did for me. And so I think that looking at it from systems change, right? People aren't people, and it's my belief, and I could be wrong, Laura, but I don't think people wake up in the morning and say, how offensive can I be today? Right? Somebody does. I'm sure somebody does, but most people don't. Right? I think most people are operating with what they know, and what they know is limited because that's what it means to be human.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So if we systems change allows us to give that grace and accountability to folks as we develop, because they know where we're going, right? And that's the biggest problem, I think, not problem but challenge facing a lot of DEI leaders, is that folks either don't know where we're going, and so why are you even doing this,
Yeah.
or sometimes the practitioner, the DEIB practitioner, is trying to do so much or is responsible for so much
Yeah.
that they can't clearly articulate where we're going and what methods are we using to get there. So
And that's part of the challenge, that as a single incumbent practitioner in an organization, you have to stay strategic, high
yep,
level, right?
yep,
And you have to be able to deep dive into actually running the programs, actually doing the data work, actually writing the communications that you're going to hand over to the comms team to put out, right?
yep,
Sitting down to review and write policies. So,
yep,
as a single incumbent practitioner, you've got to be able to flex both ways. And so, to your point about using a principle or a model, I love ADCAR. The other way I've thought about it and used another one is people are probably familiar with the head, hearts, and hands model. I add on to there another H, which is the heels, right? So the head is about the
mm,
in the head space. What type of data do people need? What type of to help them see the actual impact, right? So when we talk about health disparities, do we have the data? Do we have the baseline? When we talk about workforce diversity, what does that baseline look like? Can you show me that our organization is hurting because we're not focused on diversity, right? So that's in the headspace. People who are leading with the head, if you go to them with that type of data, they'll automatically say, "Oh, I get it. we have 10% more or 12 or 20, whatever that gap may be in first year turnover of our employees of color than our white employees. And we've got to figure this out because it's going to cost us $1.2 million if we don't figure this out, right? So that's the data, that's the head people. And then there's the H, the second H, which is for the heart, right? And that's where the human connection, the empathy comes in, and where people can start to make that human connection to the stories that we share with one another. And to your point earlier about morality, right? The moral intent about this work, that's where the moral intent comes in, that heart piece. And so, if you can help connect people to those stories and help them understand the real life people impact our policies and practices have. And then the third H is about the hands. What do I do now? And I think that's one of the biggest questions I get from leaders and organizations all the time is, Laura, we need to do this DEIB thing, right? But what do? And that's the, yeah, go ahead.
And that's so people want to know what I do, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's actually where people start.
Correct.
And it causes such challenges because the other dimensions
the other
aren't
two
really
H's.
focused on,
Yep,
right?
yep.
So I'm all for heroes and holidays.
Uh-huh.
I get it. It's low hanging fruit.
Yep.
Let's do it. However, even if those heroes and holidays are not connected with a strategy or connected with a process or an outcome, it
You're gonna get stuck spinning in Heroes and Holidays,
Yep.
right? Because where are we going after this? And we've
Yep.
never tied that to the head part, which is our strategy, which is sharing the vision of where we're going and what good looks like. Because organizations and people to your point, want to jump into the let's do something now. Tell me what to do now. Tell me how I recruit differently now. Let's stand up employee resource groups now without having
Or
it
or
tied back. So, go
or
ahead.
affinity groups,
Affinity groups, yeah.
or folks will say we're going to
Mhm.
have business resource groups. But do you know what those are? Like that's on a developmental
Yep.
plane or spectrum, and so sometimes I think it's important to recognize that even as heads, hearts, hands, and come back and talk to us about this heals part. But I think they have to be a part of the strategy and being strategic in our
Correct.
thinking. Go ahead,
So that
heals.
that H, the last one, the heals, is how do you sustain? How do you live it as part of you as an individual and as an organization? And that's where the metrics piece comes in, right? How do you tell that story on an ongoing basis with your leaders and your organization? How do you hold yourself accountable ongoing? Because we all know that this isn't just a 1 year we're going to close that 10% return over gap that I talked about, right? And by the way, now this year we're at 8% leaders of color, and by next year we're going to be at 45%. That ain't happening. That is not
Nope.
happening. I have never seen that huge of a jump in any organization. These are incremental changes that we have to make, and that's where where the H, for me, that's why I add the H, is so important. It's sustaining and being able to measure and hold ourselves accountable to the work. So when I talk about and use that 4H motto, it helps people make a better connection to how they may approach their strategy, as well as how they may be communicating to people who may be in those places, right? And I think an example is um, I talked about turnover, and that was in one of the organizations I was in. We saw about a double digit turnover difference within that 1 to 3 years within employees of color and white employees. And before me, they never had the data. They never looked at the data, right? So there's your head part. Now we bring the data into the conversation and people see the actual impact, the numbers impact on people in the organization, and we can now convert it to the actual cost to the organization, right? So now your head people is like, oh, that makes sense. Your finance people, oh, we can save some money here, right?
Mhm.
And now you tie it to listening sessions with the people who may be thinking about leaving, and the groups of demographics that of your employee bases that are most impacted, potentially impacted by those numbers. And now you can tie it to the heart. And now you're hearing those stories and how that's impacting the people, why they don't feel included, why they don't feel like they can stay, right? Now you get the head tied with the heart, and people are like, oh, wow, that was powerful. Now they're ready to do something. Now they're ready to say, stand up ERGs. Because now the ERGs can help you try to start to retain those people, right? Stand up, look at your employee development programs. How are you leveraging those to keep people? And so again, with that data, with this tie to the stories, now we can tell you people, leaders, and others, here's the steps you need to take to help us with retention. And by the way, we're going to measure that and report out on that every year, annually, right?
It always cracks me up when I hear leaders talk about, well, people are leaving us because we don't pay as much as somebody
No,
else, right?
that's
And
very basic.
yeah,
There's
right.
some truth to it. There's some truth to it.
There is some truth to it,
Yeah.
but I will tell you that people volunteer for free.
Mm-hmm.
People volunteer as a practice for free. Why? Because it's something that they believe in,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a way that they find acceptance. It's a way that they find that they're included. It's where they get a sense of belonging. And I think a lot of times it's easy for people to say, here's an example that I like to use, particularly when I'm working with employers who are struggling with their workforce stuff. And we're not sponsored by this organization, this big box store, but I'll just use them as an example.
Should we be? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. But like Target or these other big box stores, if a product does not sell, if it doesn't sell, right? If nobody buys it, they mark it down. They augment their practices as much as they can, but they never blame the customer.
Mm-hmm.
They say there is something about us or something about that product that the customer didn't want. So we take the responsibility for saying we have to change something. And that change may mean not ordering that Michael Kors lampshade, right? I don't know if he makes lampshades or not, but
Does Target actually carry Michael Kors?
yeah, I don't know. It's now Target, right? So no, but a lot of times in the workforce, we're not willing or able or nimble enough to say that there's something about our practices, there's something about our policies, there's something about our culture or our environment that we need to augment, change, adjust, do something with. And so we end up blaming, well, it's the employees, they just won't stay. Yeah. Well, I will tell you that I know that I've stayed in places that weren't paying the best because I felt good about being there, right? I felt good about the work.
I felt like there was
supported.
growth. I felt like my work was impactful. I've been there, and even as a DEIB practitioner and single DEIB practitioner organizations, when I'm trying to push that boulder up that hill of 5,000 employees, right, by myself, I actually felt supported. So it felt like I was taking some steps forward. But as soon as go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, but as soon as, you don't feel that support and you're pushing this boulder up, as much as I want to make progress in an organization without building those coalitions, without having other people help me push that boulder, as soon as I step aside, what happens to that boulder that I've been pushing up the hill all of this time, right?
Yep.
I step aside and it's almost as if I was never
Never there.
there.
And actually more destruction on the way down.
Oh yeah, because the gravity is pulling that sucker, right? I mean, it's like
So the organization has to reel back so much more than if we were able to keep that boulder out there and move forward.
yep, yep.
So we are down to our last 15 minutes. Let's talk about what are some of those things you want your single incumbent DEIB practitioners to walk away with, to start thinking about whether it is day one on the job or day 100 on the job. One to three
Yeah.
things.
I think well, one thing I'll add is how we met, right? You and
Mm.
I, right? So
Yeah.
our friendship, our partnership is almost the 10-year of our time in this space. I
Yeah.
was just thinking about it. It's been over 20 years,
Yeah.
right? So I think the single incumbent DIB practitioner needs to recognize that they're not alone,
Yeah.
right? And so, in whatever way is you can join, um, small groups of DIB, DEIB practitioners that you can, get into circles or
Round tables, whatever you
round
call them.
tables,
Uh huh.
Facebook groups, social media groups, whatever you need to do to get into those groups, because isolation is probably the most detrimental.
Yeah.
And it's also an illusion, because there are people within your organization that actually value what you're doing.
Yeah.
They may not understand it as well as
Yeah.
you do. They may not, but know that you're not alone. But you do have the sometimes our responsibilities give us the illusion of being alone.
Yeah.
But I would say whatever you can do to connect yourself either with a professional or personal development organization around these topics, do it. That's the first thing I would
And
say.
there's paid, right? Paid groups out there that you can
Yep.
be part of, but there's also
Yep.
lots of free groups, like the one you and I met in. That was a free group that people came and, but it's going to be different levels of practice and understanding of this practice, this work that show up in those groups. And so
Yeah.
you've got to be able to tap into the resources that you might need. So what for me, and I hope for you too. One of those was this relationship that we have, and
Yeah.
that has lasted nearly 20 years. To your point, and we've been able to bounce things off of each other back and forth as we have diverted into different professional spaces and industries, and come back and check in with one another and say, hey, over here in healthcare, here's what we're seeing. What about in government, right? What about in law? What about in, so can we help? You're laughing because there's truth to that. We've done a lot of that back and forth.
Yeah, right. And the funny thing about the back and forth is we can do that because we don't see this work as our work,
Yeah.
right? So
Collective.
sometimes there's this competition, or because we're in a capitalist society, and I'm not a very good capitalist,
Me neither.
that folks will say, well, I don't want to give away my good idea because Laura might take that and use that in his organization and then not give me any credit, right? So first and foremost is to recognize that none of these ideas belong to us,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
they are out in the universe, and just like grains of sand or pollen or snowflakes, they flutter, and sometimes they flutter right on us or in our vicinity, and we discover them, and we go, oh wow.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm not taking away from scholarship, right? So there are folks who do scholarship on this work and
Yep.
need to get credit for it. So if
Yep.
you take somebody's scholarly work, you need to give them credit for it. However, but using that as a tool to not communicate or not share ideas is folly, right? It is not helpful. Because there have been tons of times when I've leaned on Laura. I said, Laura, what do you think about this? And he's like, Andre, don't you dare do that. Like
That is foolishness.
that is foolishness. Don't do that foolishness. And that's who you want in your corner. I do not want somebody who will agree with all of my foolishness. Some
Yeah.
of it, I want you to agree with some of it,
Yeah.
but not all. You don't have to agree with all of my foolishness, right? So I think that's the second thing.
I was going to say that's the second thing is willingness to learn from others and also exchange ideas and experiences, right? Because we don't do this work in isolation, to your point. And the fact, and I've always done this, and I will truly believe this, is if I can help you and create a more inclusive environment in whatever industry, whatever part of you, the world, nation that you live in, and eventually that seeps out and we meet somewhere in the middle, look what we've done. Look what we've been able to build together, right? That's
Yeah,
why I have been so open about talking to people and giving ideas and sharing with people what they should be thinking about. They don't have to do it. They don't have to take my recommendations, but
yeah,
also at the same time learning from people. You
yep.
know, so
And so, and so I think that the third thing is really recognizing that this work is bigger than all of us, right?
yeah,
And sometimes what people will take on, they will take on the martyr mentality and say, "Well, I have to do this." And the truth is, if you want to be effective, all you have to do is run your leg of the race and not miss the handoff. Right, so I don't have to run the
yeah,
whole race.
no,
I don't have to do the whole thing. I just need to be effective in my space and make sure that I'm creating opportunities and resources for other people to continue what I'm doing. I'm so not only am I pushing this boulder up a hill, but I'm also bringing in some logs to stop this thing from rolling down the hill
yeah,
because it needs to continue to grow. And I would also, actually I would add a fourth thing to
okay,
this, right? So you asked for three, but the fourth is recognizing that context changes and we need to adapt to those contexts,
yeah,
right? So gender pronouns is one of those things,
yep.
that I'm adapting to the change.
And it was never
And
in the
I see
conversation 20 years ago.
20 years ago we would never had that
No.
conversation,
Mm-mm.
right? So you need to be adaptable, and see how these things can be, um, can create opportunities for DEIB to grow and develop. So
Perfect. I think those are great walkaways for people. But if
yeah.
there's anything else, what would you think? To tell the single incumbent DIB practitioners who feel like they're walking alone. Right. The next couple of conversations will continue this thread of walking alone, and we'll build on take a deep dive into some of the topics that we brought up here because this is only our first session. But we'll build on these things. But what are some of those other things you might think about leaving people with?
Yeah, I would also say, and we have some of these things, some of these tools in our YouTube channel, and we'll be developing more. But
And you can scan
but
the QR that you see right now on Andre's left hand side, right above the LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Yeah, other way.
I think it's other way. Okay. So, but I think there are some. I think there are. Be prepared to really center yourself, outside of this work,
Yeah,
right? So make sure you have hobbies and you're joyful and you're filling yourself with light and delight. And so I know on our YouTube channel we have some meditations
yeah,
for you to start using. And again, these are just opportunities to just take 5 minutes to think about how do you deal with microaggressions, how do you deal with being in a hostile, or toxic work
yeah,
environment, right? How do you, when you yourself have said something racist or against your values, how do you forgive yourself
yeah,
and move on from those things? Because I know that I have, right?
yeah.
Or I get called out on something. And so I would say, be prepared to surround yourself with resources that allow you to get recentered and to fill your cup. so that you can continually be mindful
Yeah.
as opposed to mindless, right?
So let's
So those are
commit
a
to
couple of
that.
things.
Next week. Let's talk about prevention of burnout for those single incumbent DEIB practitioners. Right?
Okay.
What are some of those things that you can do for yourself? We talked about that circle of finding the round table, the circle, the groups that you connect with. That's one way, and we can certainly dive more into that. But what are some of those ways that you can prevent burnout for yourself as a DEIB practitioner? Because um, you and I have talked about this. This isn't just our 9 to 5, the hat we put on when we do our professional work. It is about who we are even outside of work. And I don't know about you, but my wife has told me multiple times, Laura, you got to take that diversity hat off.
Turn it off. She
Turn it
said,
off.
turn it off. And she can see it in my eyes, right? So I see something happening. I'm like, she's like, turn it off, turn it
many
off,
times, many
turn
times.
it
So
off.
maybe let's bring this conversation to the next week's conversation and talk about how do we prevent burnout and how do we keep that flame going as we work in this space of DEIB, especially as the single incumbent practitioners.
Yeah. And also, I mean, we want to, as we continue these conversations, leave some space for questions. We want to leave some space for some of your
Yeah.
experiences as well. So join in if tag a friend. Um,
Join the Facebook group. One of the biggest
join.
things you can do is join the Facebook group if you're not
Yep.
already part of it. We'll continue the conversations there. We can certainly be reached there as well. Um, YouTube has a great way to connect with us too. We'll check on there if you prefer to use YouTube. We are both on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with either one of us on LinkedIn, we're more than open to connect on LinkedIn and connect with you and sit down and have a chat and explore how ways we can support you because we've been there. We know how it's like. And I've been told one time I was talking to a young practitioner, newer practitioner, and they said, "Lord, I've talked to others who walked into roles where they had infrastructure in place, they had budget in place, they had XYZ in place, and they don't get what I'm struggling through."
Yep.
And I can tell you, both of us have been through that, right?
Yep.
And so it's helpful, extremely helpful, to have people who have gone through, walked through that, to be able to tap on and say, hey, what did you do about this? I only have $2,000 for programming. What can I do? I only
Yep.
have $10,000 to stand up ERGs. Do I need to assign all of them dollars? Because if it's $1,000 each, I have 5 ARGs. That's half of my budgeting right there. What do I do? Right?
Yep.
As opposed to
And then
some
how to,
large organizations who's got like able to give $20,000 per ERG. Right?
and then what am I using for outcomes?
Mm-hmm.
Like even if we have it, how do I
Yeah.
justify it given because who wants to fund a gripe group, a group that's
Right.
focused on problems, right? Nobody. So we can help work through those things in the next coming months, and look forward to
Yeah.
engaging with folks.
But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. We've got about 2 minutes left. So I want to plug again, connect with us on LinkedIn, connect with us on the Facebook group. The Facebook group is called Insights to DEIB. There's the YouTube channel that you're probably, if you're listening to us right now, you're joining us on YouTube. So continue to like and share and connect with us that way. The QR code to Andre's left, Andre, if you can point to that particular thing, that way, both ways. Uh, you can scan that and download a quick about us and what type of services we can provide if you want to go that route for you and your organization as well. But want to thank all of you. Andre, thank you as always for joining me and having this conversation. Want to thank everyone who's been able to join us on the live call, or if you're watching after the fact in the recorded call. Thank you so much. But send us questions, send us insights, and be able to share with us and others. We are always looking to learn and grow in our own practice around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as well. But in the meantime, my name is Lord Lee, and this is Andre Cohen. Anything else you want to throw in, Andre?
We're excited to see who we become in this practice. So
All,
we'll see you the next time we get together.
all
Peace.
right. Thank you so much, everyone.